Welcome to our journey through love in the time of cholera. This is a novel about love, but not just love as we imagine it in fairy tales. This is a story about love that endures, transforms, fades, and rekindles. It spans a lifetime, following two people who fall in love as teenagers, are separated by fate, and reunite in old age, showing us how love can survive beyond time, rejection, and the realities of life.
Episode 1. The Beginning of Love.
The novel is set in a Caribbean town at the end of the 19th century, a time when love was often expressed through letters rather than conversations, when marriages were arranged for status and security, and when the presence of disease, especially cholera, made life fragile. The title of the book, Love in the Time of Cholera, is more than a reference to disease. It is about love that must survive through hardships, waiting, and the changing nature of the human heart. At the center of this story are Florentino Ariza and Fermina Daza, two young people who believe their love is eternal. But as we will see, love is not always as simple as passion and promises. It is shaped by time, circumstances, and the choices we make. Florentino Ariza is a young man who, by most standards, would not be considered remarkable. He is not rich, not powerful, not particularly handsome, but he has something that sets him apart: a heart full of poetry and longing. He works as a telegraph operator, spending his days sending messages for others, watching lovers exchange letters, dreaming of one day writing love letters of his own. His life changes one afternoon when he sees Fermina Daza for the first time. She is walking with her aunt, carrying a basket of groceries, her movements graceful and confident. She is only 13 or 14 years old, still young, but to Florentino, she appears radiant, untouchable, almost divine. In that moment, he is completely, hopelessly in love. He does not speak to her, does not try to approach her. Instead, he watches from a distance, captivated by the very sight of her. From that day on, he adjusts his daily routine just to catch a glimpse of her, passing by her house, lingering in places he knows she visits, hoping for the smallest moment of connection. Then one day, their eyes meet. It is only for a second, but for Florentino, it is enough to ignite his passion even further. He knows he must do something. Florentino does not have money, social status, or an impressive family name. What he does have is words, and he decides to use them. He spends days, even weeks, crafting a letter that expresses everything he feels. It is filled with poetry, promises, and dreams of a shared future. But getting this letter to Fermina is not simple. In a society where young women are closely watched and romance outside of marriage is discouraged, he cannot simply walk up to her and hand her the letter. Instead, he finds help in her aunt, who secretly believes in romance and agrees to deliver his words. Then Florentino waits. Each passing day feels like an eternity. He wonders if she will read the letter, if she will respond, or if she will simply throw it away without a second thought. And then finally, a reply arrives. Fermina's letter is short, careful, and reserved, but it is not a rejection. Encouraged by this, they begin a secret correspondence, exchanging letters in which their love grows stronger and more intense. For 2 years, their letters are their only means of connection. They rarely meet in person, only brief, stolen glances across a plaza, a fleeting moment in the market. But through their writing, they create a love that feels eternal and unbreakable. Florentino, a passionate and obsessive young man, is completely devoted to Fermina. He believes their love is a sacred bond, something that cannot be undone. He dreams of the day he will ask for her hand in marriage, imagining a future where they will be together forever. But love, especially young love, is rarely so simple. One day, Fermina's father, Lorenzo Daza, discovers their secret. He is a practical man, ambitious and concerned with his daughter's future. To him, love is not a reason to marry. Marriage should be about social and financial security. And Florentino, with his modest background and romantic nature, is far from the husband he envisions for his daughter. Furious, he forbids Fermina from writing to Florentino ever again. But when Fermina refuses to obey, he takes drastic action. He forces her to leave the town, taking her on a long journey to visit relatives in another city. He believes that distance will make her forget, and that, in time, she will understand why Florentino is not a suitable match. For Florentino, this is a devastating blow. The woman he loves has vanished from his life, leaving him with nothing but the memory of her words. He continues to write, pouring his heart into letters he has no way of delivering. He clings to hope, believing that as soon as she returns, their love will continue just as before. At first, Fermina feels the same way. She misses his letters, his words, his presence in her life. She thinks of him often, imagining the moment they will reunite. But time is a strange force. As the months pass, something shifts. She begins to see things more clearly, more rationally. What once felt like an epic, passionate love now seems distant, almost unreal. She starts to wonder if she had been mistaken, if perhaps her feelings for Florentino were not love, but a young girl's romantic fantasy. When she returns home 2 years later, Florentino is waiting for her, convinced that their love remains unchanged. He believes this is the moment when they will finally be together. But when Fermina sees him again, something happens that neither of them expected. She feels nothing, not love, not excitement, just emptiness. To her, Florentino is a stranger now. She tells him, with honesty but without cruelty, that their love was just an illusion, something that belonged to the past. Florentino is devastated. He cannot understand how love can disappear so easily. But no matter what she says, he makes a vow to himself. He will wait for her, no matter how long it takes. And so their paths separate. For Fermina, this chapter of her life is closed. For Florentino, the story has only begun.
Episode 2. Separation in Fermina's marriage.
We saw how Florentino Ariza and Fermina Daza fell in love through letters, how their secret romance lasted for 2 years, and how Fermina's father, Lorenzo Daza, separated them by taking her away. But when she finally returned, her feelings had changed. What once felt like eternal love now seemed like a distant memory. And she rejected Florentino, telling him that their love was nothing more than a dream from their youth. Florentino, devastated but determined, vowed that he would wait for her forever. But time, as always, moves forward, and life does not wait for those who are stuck in the past. We will see what happens as Fermina begins a new chapter of her life, one that takes her down a path very different from the one Florentino imagined. Florentino Ariza, still in shock from Fermina's rejection, refuses to accept that this is the end of their love story. For him, Fermina's words, "It was only an illusion," do not make sense. How could love that had felt so real simply vanish? He believes that she is confused, that she has convinced herself of something that is not true, and that given time, she will realize her mistake. But Fermina does not look back. She does not write to him. She does not speak of him. She does not show any signs of doubt. For her, the past is the past, and she has decided to move on. Florentino, on the other hand, falls into a deep sadness. He spends his days wandering the streets, passing by Fermina's house, even though he knows he will not see her. He writes letters, but never sends them. He throws himself into his poetry, believing that his pain is something beautiful, something romantic. But in reality, he is suffering. His mother, Tránsito Ariza, worries about him. She is a strong woman, practical and realistic, and she does not understand why her son refuses to move on. She tells him to forget Fermina, to find someone else, to stop torturing himself over a love that is already lost. But Florentino does not listen. He continues to wait, to hope, to dream. While Florentino is trapped in the past, Fermina is moving forward. She is no longer a teenage girl, writing love letters in secret. She is growing into a young woman, strong and independent, learning about the world beyond romantic fantasies. After rejecting Florentino, she focuses on her daily life, on helping her father manage their household, on improving herself. She is proud of her decision. She feels free. The love she once felt for Florentino now seems like a childish dream, something that belonged to a different version of herself. And then she meets Dr. Juvenal Urbino. Dr. Juvenal Urbino is everything Florentino Ariza is not. He is wealthy, well-educated, and highly respected. He is a doctor trained in Europe, a man of science and logic, someone who believes in order and reason rather than passion and poetry. In this town, where cholera is still a dangerous disease, he is seen as a modern hero, a man bringing medicine and progress. When he first meets Fermina, it is not a romantic moment. He is called to her house because she is sick, and her father, wanting the best care for her, insists that the famous Dr. Urbino must be the one to examine her. Juvenal Urbino, who is used to seeing patients from all social classes, does not expect to be impressed by the young woman he is called to treat. But when he meets Fermina, something unexpected happens. He is fascinated by her. Unlike the women he usually meets, Fermina is not shy or overly polite. She is intelligent, direct, and full of quiet confidence. Even though she is sick, she speaks to him with a strength that surprises him. After she recovers, Dr. Urbino begins to visit her house more often, finding excuses to see her. At first, Fermina does not take him seriously. She sees him as a serious, logical man, too different from her youthful ideas of love. But he is persistent, and more importantly, her father approves of him completely. To Lorenzo Dazza, Juvenal Urbino is the perfect choice for his daughter. He is rich, respected, and has a promising future. This is exactly the kind of man Lorenzo had always hoped Fermina would marry. At first, Fermina resists Dr. Urbino's courtship. She does not feel the same burning passion she once felt for Florentino. There are no love letters, no stolen glances, no poetry. Instead, there are rational conversations, practical discussions about life and the future. But as time passes, she starts to see something in him that she never saw in Florentino: stability. Juvenal Urbino offers her a different kind of love, one that is not about fantasy and emotion, but about security and respect. He is mature, responsible, and will provide her with a comfortable life. Slowly, Fermina begins to appreciate him. She realizes that love does not always have to be dramatic and overwhelming. Sometimes, love is a quiet decision, a choice to build a life with someone who will always be there. And so, when Dr. Urbino finally proposes, Fermina, after some hesitation, accepts. Florentino Ariza hears the news like a man receiving a death sentence. He always believed that if he waited long enough, Fermina would return to him. He thought that her rejection was temporary, that one day she would realize her mistake. But now she is marrying another man. And not just any man, a man who is everything he is not. He watches the wedding from a distance, unseen among the crowd. He sees Fermina in her wedding dress, standing beside Juvenal Urbino, a man who can give her a life that Florentino never could. At that moment, Florentino makes a vow. He tells himself that he will not give up. He will wait, no matter how long it takes. And so, while Fermina begins her new life as the wife of a respected doctor, Florentino starts a new chapter of his own. A life of waiting, but also a life of secret affairs, of distractions, of trying to fill the void that Fermina left behind. But as we will see, love is never truly gone. It just waits for the right moment to return.
Episode 3: Florentino's Waiting and His Affairs.
We saw Fermina Dazza's decision to marry Dr. Juvenal Urbino, choosing stability over passion, while Florentino Ariza was left heartbroken. He had spent years believing that their love was eternal, that if he waited long enough, she would come back to him. But as he watched her walk down the aisle with another man, reality struck him. She had moved on. Yet Florentino did not give up. Instead of accepting that their love was over, he made a vow. He would wait for her, no matter how long it took. It did not matter if she was married, if she had a family, if she built a new life without him. One day, she would be free again. And when that day came, he would be there, waiting. But waiting is never easy. And while Florentino's heart remained loyal to Fermina, his body and his actions told a different story. After Fermina's wedding, Florentino fell into deep sadness. He spent weeks in isolation, refusing to see friends, barely eating, consumed by grief. He wrote long letters that he never sent, describing his pain in dramatic, poetic language. In his mind, he was not just a man who had lost his love. He was a tragic figure, a man whose fate was to suffer for love. But time does not stop for broken hearts. And soon, life forced him to return to the world. His mother, Tránsito Ariza, who had always been practical and realistic, could not bear to see her son wasting away. She insisted that he focus on his future, telling him that life goes on whether he wants it to or not. Florentino, unable to argue with her, threw himself into his work. He had a secure job at the River Navigation Company, which managed the town's transport system along the Magdalena River. He started as a simple worker, but over time he proved himself to be intelligent, ambitious, and hardworking. He was determined to rise through the ranks, believing that one day, when Fermina was free again, he would be a man worthy of her. But while his mind was occupied with work, his heart and body needed an escape. And so, for the first time in his life, Florentino Ariza took another lover. It happened unexpectedly, with a woman much older than him, the widow Nazareth, a woman known for her elegance, experience, and independent spirit. She had been married for many years, but after her husband's death, she had no interest in remarrying or following society's expectations. One evening, after a business meeting, she invited Florentino to her home for dinner. At first, he was nervous. He had never been with another woman, never even kissed anyone other than Fermina. But the widow knew exactly what she was doing. With gentle patience, she guided him, teaching him the pleasures of the body, helping him forget his pain, at least for a little while. For months, their affair continued in secrecy. She understood that Florentino was not in love with her, that in his heart, he still belonged to another woman. But she did not care. She enjoyed his company, and in return, she taught him everything he knew about love, passion, and physical intimacy. When the affair ended, Florentino did not feel sadness. Instead, he felt something new, a realization that while his heart would always belong to Fermina, his body did not have to suffer. And so began a pattern that would define the next 50 years of his life. Florentino told himself that none of these affairs mattered. Every time he took a new lover, he convinced himself that he was still faithful to Fermina, because in his heart, he had never stopped loving her. But love and desire are not the same thing. Over the years, Florentino became a man of many women. He had countless affairs, each one different from the last. Some women were young, others were widows, some were wealthy and bored, others were poor and searching for comfort. Some lasted months, others were only a single night. Yet he never let himself truly love them. Each time he told himself, "This is just temporary. This is just to pass the time until Fermina is mine again." And so, even though he spent years in other women's arms, his heart remained unchanged. At the same time, Florentino continued his climb in the River Navigation Company. He worked harder than anyone else, taking on more responsibility, learning everything he could about the business. Slowly, he rose through the ranks, proving himself to be a man of intelligence and strategy. By the time he reached middle age, he had become one of the most powerful men in the company, overseeing its expansion and influence. His success was driven by one thing: his love for Fermina. He believed that one day she would need him. One day, her husband would die. And when that happened, she would see that Florentino had never left her side. And so he waited. While Florentino was building his empire and collecting lovers, Fermina was learning what it meant to be a wife. Her marriage to Dr. Juvenal Urbino was not unhappy, but it was also not the passionate love story that Florentino had imagined for her. At first, she respected and admired her husband. He was a good man, intelligent and ambitious, and he treated her with kindness and care. But over time, their differences became clearer. Juvenal Urbino was a man of discipline, order, and rational thinking. He believed in science, in medicine, in the idea that everything in life could be controlled. He did not understand romance or poetry, and he did not believe in grand, dramatic gestures of love. Fermina, on the other hand, had a passionate spirit, even if she did not always show it. She longed for a deeper connection, for a love that felt alive. And so, as the years passed, her marriage became one of routine rather than passion. They had their good moments and their bad moments. But Fermina never questioned her decision. She had chosen this life, and she would live it fully. She never thought of Florentino again. Or at least, that is what she told herself. As time went on, Florentino and Fermina lived separate lives, growing older, moving forward, never crossing paths. Yet, deep down, their connection had never truly been broken. Florentino continued waiting, telling himself that one day his patience would be rewarded. And then, one afternoon, something happened that changed everything. Fermina's husband, Dr. Juvenal Urbino, suffered a tragic accident. He slipped while trying to catch his parrot, fell from a ladder, and died instantly. For the first time in more than 50 years, Fermina Daza was alone again. And Florentino Ariza knew his time had come.
Episode 4. A Second Chance at Love.
We followed Florentino Ariza's long, patient wait for Fermina Daza. While she lived her life as the wife of Dr. Juvenal Urbino, he spent decades rising in power, building a reputation, and having many lovers, but never truly loving anyone else. He told himself that every moment, every decision, every success was in preparation for the day when Fermina would be free again. And then suddenly, that moment arrived. Dr. Juvenal Urbino, a man who had survived wars, political conflicts, and deadly diseases, died in the most unexpected way, falling from a ladder while trying to catch his pet parrot. Just like that, after more than 50 years of marriage, Fermina Daza was a widow. For most people, this would be a time of mourning, a period of reflection and solitude. But for Florentino Ariza, it was something else entirely. It was his second chance. The day of Dr. Urbino's funeral, the entire town gathered to pay their respects. He had been one of the most respected men in the city, and his death was a great loss to the community. Fermina, now an old woman, stood dressed in black, surrounded by mourners, her face calm but distant. She had been through a lifetime of struggles and compromises, but she had never prepared for this moment, the moment of facing life alone. And then, amid the quiet prayers and whispered condolences, Florentino Ariza appeared. Dressed in a black suit, his face still thin and intense, he walked toward her, his heart beating just as wildly as it had when he was a boy, watching her from a distance. For 50 years, he had imagined this moment, planned it in his mind 1,000 times. He approached her slowly, his voice quiet but steady. "Fermina," he said, "I have waited for this moment for more than half a century. I have never stopped thinking about you. I have never loved anyone else. And now that you are free, I come to offer you my love once again, as pure and loyal as it was the first time." It was perhaps the most inappropriate moment to declare love at the funeral of her husband. But Florentino Ariza had never cared about timing, about what was proper, about what society expected. He had waited too long for this chance, and he was not going to miss it. For a moment, there was silence. Then Fermina looked at him with cold, sharp eyes. She was not moved by his devotion, nor was she touched by his persistence. Instead, she felt deep anger, even disgust. "Get out of my sight," she hissed, her voice shaking not with grief, but with pure rage. "You have no shame. You come here to my husband's funeral to tell me this? You have no respect. Leave at once and never speak to me again." She turned away from him, her back straight, her face unreadable. Florentino stood frozen, feeling humiliated, but not defeated. He had expected a difficult start. He knew Fermina well enough to understand that she would not accept him so easily. But he was not afraid of waiting. He had already waited more than 50 years. What was a little longer? Instead of giving up, Florentino Ariza began writing letters again. At first, Fermina ignored them. She refused to read them, sometimes leaving them unopened for weeks. But Florentino was patient. He did not ask for anything in return. He simply wrote, filling pages with memories of their youth, observations about life, reflections on love and time. Slowly, something began to change. Fermina still did not think of him as a lover, but over time, she started to look forward to his letters. They were thoughtful, beautifully written, filled with wisdom and gentle humor. In a life that had suddenly become lonely and quiet, they became a small source of comfort. After several months, she finally wrote back. At first, it was just a short reply, polite but distant. But Florentino, sensing that the door had opened just a little, continued writing. And with each letter, Fermina found herself responding more and more. This was not the passionate love of their youth, filled with dramatic promises and desperate longing. This was something different, something softer and more mature. They were both old now, with lives full of experiences, regrets, and lessons learned. Their letters became a conversation between two people who had lived, who had suffered, who understood the passage of time. After a year of correspondence, Fermina finally agreed to see Florentino in person, reconnecting after a lifetime. The first time they met again, face to face, it was awkward. They were no longer young and full of dreams. They were elderly, slower in movement, carrying the weight of years. Fermina, who had been so angry with him before, now saw him with different eyes. She still did not feel the fiery passion of youth, but she found herself enjoying his company, his conversation, his stories. He made her laugh, something she had not done in a long time. Over the following months, their meetings became more frequent. They took long walks together, shared quiet moments, and slowly, Fermina began to trust him again. Florentino never rushed her. He never demanded anything. He simply waited, just as he always had. And one day, Fermina realized something unexpected. She enjoyed being with him. She liked his company. She liked who she was when she was with him. It was not the same love as before, but it was love nonetheless. As their relationship deepened, Florentino proposed a journey together, a trip down the Magdalena River, a place filled with memories of their youth. It was meant to be a quiet, peaceful trip, away from the gossip of the town, away from society's expectations. At first, Fermina hesitated. What would people say? Would they judge her, an old woman, for finding love again? But then she realized she no longer cared what others thought. So they boarded the riverboat, embarking on a journey that was not just a physical trip, but a symbolic one. A journey toward the past, toward healing, toward a love that had waited for more than half a century. And as they sailed down the river, Fermina let go of the life she had lived and embraced the one that still remained.
Episode 5. Love in Old Age.
We witnessed Florentino Ariza's long-awaited second chance with Fermina Daza. After her husband, Dr. Juvenal Urbino, passed away in a tragic accident, Florentino declared his love once again at the funeral of all places. At first, Fermina was furious, rejecting him completely. But Florentino, as always, did not give up. Through letters, patience, and quiet persistence, he slowly earned back her trust. What started as cold, distant correspondence gradually turned into meaningful companionship, and after more than 50 years of separation, Fermina and Florentino finally reconnected. But this was not the passionate, reckless love of their youth. This was something new, something different, a love that had endured time, pain, and loss. It was a love between two people who had lived full lives, who carried the weight of the past, and who were now choosing to embrace whatever time they had left together. And so, after months of rekindling their bond, they set off on a journey, a river voyage that would change everything. By now, Fermina and Florentino were both old, and their relationship was not well received by society. People whispered behind their backs, mocking the idea of old people in love, treating their relationship as something foolish, even ridiculous. Some saw it as Florentino taking advantage of Fermina's loneliness, while others simply could not understand why an elderly widow would fall in love again. But Fermina no longer cared. She had spent her whole life following rules, worrying about reputation, choosing duty over passion. Now, for the first time, she realized that she had nothing to prove to anyone. She had loved as a wife, she had been a mother, she had fulfilled all the expectations society had placed on her. But what about her own happiness? She was now at an age where she had more past than future. And if there was ever a time to live for herself, it was now. So when Florentino suggested they take a trip together sailing down the Magdalena River, she agreed. Not because it was a grand romantic gesture, but because she wanted to escape, to be free, to experience life without limits, without judgment. The riverboat was not luxurious, but it was peaceful. The wide waters stretched out endlessly before them, with thick jungles on either side, filled with the sounds of birds, insects, and the occasional distant village. Florentino had spent his life working in river transport, and to him, the river was not just a route of travel, it was a symbol of time itself, always flowing forward, never stopping. On the boat, Fermina and Florentino spent their days talking, reminiscing, reading books, and simply enjoying each other's company. There was no need for grand declarations or desperate passion. They had already lived through all that. Now it was about comfort, companionship, and the deep peace of being with someone who truly understood them. For the first time in her life, Fermina felt light, unburdened, free. And for Florentino, this was the moment he had waited for all his life. But reality was never far behind. As they traveled from town to town, stopping along the riverbanks, they noticed something unsettling: the way people looked at them. They were old, and to many, old people in love were something to be laughed at, not admired. Even the boat crew, young, strong men who had spent their lives seeing couples travel together, found their presence strange. They whispered to each other, making jokes about the old widow and the foolish man who had waited 50 years for her. Fermina heard them. She noticed the way strangers stared, the way some people whispered behind their backs. And for a moment, she doubted herself. Had she made a mistake? Was this truly love, or was it just loneliness disguised as love? But then she looked at Florentino. He was older, slower, his once thin figure now slightly hunched, his skin wrinkled from time. But his eyes had never changed. They still held that same devotion, that same unwavering love that he had carried for her all these years. And Fermina made her choice. She did not care what people thought. She was happy, and that was enough. As the riverboat reached its final destination, Fermina and Florentino were faced with a painful reality. Their journey had to end. If they returned home, they would once again be forced to live under the eyes of society, dealing with gossip, expectations, and the weight of reality. And so Florentino had an idea. What if they never went back? He spoke to the captain, asking him to turn the boat around and continue sailing up and down the river indefinitely. But there was a problem. Without an official reason, the boat could not simply continue traveling without returning to port. So Florentino came up with one final act of rebellion. He instructed the crew to raise the yellow flag of cholera. This flag was a symbol of disease, a sign that the boat had been infected and could not dock at any port. In reality, there was no cholera outbreak on board, but by flying the flag, they would be left alone, untouched, free to sail as long as they wanted. And so, as the boat drifted down the endless river, Fermina and Florentino sat together, watching the water flow, knowing that their love had no destination, no endpoint, no need for anything beyond the present moment. This was not the love of youth, not the burning, impatient passion they had once known. This was a different kind of love, a love that had waited, that had endured the weight of time and loss. It was not about promises or forever. It was simply about now, about choosing love even in the face of aging, even in the face of death. Society had always told them that love belonged to the young. But as they sailed under the flag of cholera, leaving the world behind, they proved that love does not have an age. It does not have to follow rules. It does not have to be conventional or acceptable. It only has to be real.
Episode 6. The Final Reflection.
We have followed Fermina Daza and Florentino Ariza through their youth, their separation, their individual lives, and finally, their unexpected reunion in old age. We have seen how love can be passionate and fleeting, patient and enduring, painful and healing, lost and rediscovered. we saw Fermina and Florentino escape the expectations of society, choosing to sail down the river indefinitely under the flag of cholera, symbolizing their desire to live outside the boundaries of time, age, and societal judgment. It was not a conventional love story, but it was theirs. Now, as we reach the final moments of their story, let's take a step back and reflect. What does this novel truly tell us about love, about time, about the human heart? The last time we see Fermina and Florentino, they are on a riverboat, sailing endlessly, refusing to return to shore. The yellow flag of cholera flies above them, sending a message to the world that they are untouchable, unreachable. It is a metaphor, of course. Their love, too, is untouchable, free from the rules of time, age, and social expectation. By choosing to remain on the river, they have chosen love as a journey, not a destination. Their story has no clear ending, just as love itself has no final chapter. Love is always moving, always shifting, just like the river. It is not about where they are going, because they are already there. One of the most powerful themes of this novel is that love is not one thing. It changes, it takes many forms, and it can exist in different ways at different times in life. We saw the love of youth, the kind that is intense, overwhelming, full of longing and poetry. This was the love that Florentino and Fermina shared in their secret letters. A love that was dramatic and passionate, but fragile. Then we saw the love of marriage, the kind built on stability, companionship, and routine. Fermina's marriage to Dr. Juvenal Urbino was not filled with poetry or grand gestures, but it was real. It had struggles, it had disappointments, but it also had partnership and mutual respect. And finally, we saw the love of old age, the kind that is gentle, patient, and forgiving. The love that does not burn wildly but glows steadily. This is the love that Fermina and Florentino find in each other at the end of their lives. A love that is not about youth or passion, but about companionship, understanding, and the quiet joy of simply being together. This novel tells us that love does not have one definition. It is different for everyone, and it changes as we change. Another question this novel explores is, does love last forever, or does time eventually destroy it? For Florentino, love was something that could survive time, separation, even rejection. He waited more than 50 years for Fermina, believing that one day she would return to him. His love, in many ways, was obsessive and unrealistic. He had turned Fermina into a symbol rather than a real person, holding on to an idea of love rather than experiencing it fully in his own life. For Fermina, love was something that changed over time. When she returned after being separated from Florentino for 2 years, she realized her feelings had faded. Later, she learned to love her husband, even though it was not the same love she had felt as a girl. And at the end of her life, she discovered a new kind of love with Florentino, one that was not based on youth or passion, but on deep understanding and connection. So does love ever truly die? The answer the novel gives us is complicated. Love changes, weakens, strengthens, disappears, and reappears. It is not always what we expect it to be, and sometimes it arrives at the wrong time. But in some form, in some way, love is always present, waiting to be rediscovered. Another major theme in the novel is society's expectations of love and relationships. When Fermina and Florentino fell in love as teenagers, they had to hide it from her father, who believed marriage was about status, not emotion. When Fermina married Dr. Urbino, she chose stability over passion because it was what society expected. And in old age, when she and Florentino reconnected, they were judged for their love because people believed love was something only for the young. This novel challenges those ideas. It asks, why do we believe love must follow rules? Why do we think love is only for certain ages, certain kinds of people, certain stages of life? In the end, Fermina and Florentino reject all of those rules. By choosing to sail away, they say, love is ours. It does not belong to society, to rules, to expectations. It belongs to us, and we will live it in our own way. One of the most beautiful things about this novel is how it mixes reality with myth, fantasy with truth. This is a style called magical realism, which Gabriel García Márquez is famous for. At times, the novel feels like a dream, a man waiting 50 years for a woman, a riverboat sailing endlessly under a flag of cholera, a love that seems to survive everything. But at the same time, it is deeply real, showing us the pain, loss, disappointment, and struggles of life and love. This combination of magic and reality makes the story feel both timeless and completely human. It reminds us that love, like life itself, is both extraordinary and ordinary at the same time. So after all this, what is Love in the Time of Cholera really about? It is about how love changes as we grow older. It is about waiting and longing and the cost of devotion. It is about the different forms love can take and the choices we make because of it. And most of all, it is about time, how time affects love and how love resists time. Florentino and Fermina's love story does not have a traditional happy ending. They do not return to their youth. They do not erase the years they lost. But they find love again in a way that makes sense for them, in a way that is real. And that is why this novel remains one of the greatest love stories ever written. Because it tells the truth. Love is never what we expect. It is not perfect. It is not always easy. But when it is real, it never truly disappears.